When the scapegoat decides to go no contact with an abusive family member, I'm talking somebody like a caretaker or parent, somebody who has some sort of power position within the family hierarchy and who targeted them since childhood. So I'm talking about somebody who used their own child as a personal emotional relief system. Okay, I'm talking about consistent psychological abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, while at the same time, of course, feigning victimhood in the aftermath, because their behavior is never their fault. It's always the child's fault. It's always somebody else's fault. And their behavior always has an excuse behind it, no matter how bad it actually is. And in the context of a narcissistic family system, a context where people will, you know, protect the abuser, they will enable the abuser, they will deny what's going on, they will, they will avoid dealing with the real issues. So in the context of a narcissistic family system, that decision to go no contact will be met not only with condemnation, but also with a smear campaign in which the scapegoat will be falsely labeled as resentful or spiteful or mean-spirited. This decision will be treated as if the scapegoat decided to do this from a place of immaturity, or from a place of like whining, or from a place that the scapegoat is unable to see the bigger picture in the grand scheme of things. And when the scapegoat comes out of a narcissistic family system, when they decide to go no contact, what happens oftentimes is that the abuser's behavior will be projected onto the scapegoat. Now, first of all, how does it happen? How do we even get to this point? How is it possible that one family member is treated, is consistently targeted by the same family member all the time, and they are the ones who end up getting shunned? They are the ones who end up alone. They are the ones who end up having to deal with not just the trauma of what happened at home, but also having everybody turned on them. Well, in these types of systems, the first thing, and I can tell you this from personal experience, is that these families are dominated by avoidance. There's a lot of avoidance going on. Nobody wants to deal with the real issue. And I'll give you a scenario. Like, for example, if you have a dysregulated, emotionally out of control parent, okay, who's consistently picking fights, creating drama with their partner or the other parent, there's always yelling in the house, there's always screaming in the house, the atmosphere is no good. Well, the partner, as a result, they can hop into their car and leave the house, and they do, and they will. And I mean, at least in my case, that's what happened. The partner will hop into the car and leave the house, and then they will, they have the power to do that. They have the power to start working long hours to stay away from the house as much as possible. They will keep themselves busy with other things, passion projects, whatever is happening in their life, and they will absolutely minimize the interaction that they have, coming home. They will avoid those types of interactions with their partner as much as possible. And so what happens though is when that partner isn't home, when nobody's home, then the abuser or the dysregulated, parent is gonna take those frustrations and take their anger and take their resentment and take everything that, that they have within, all that, all those unresolved issues, and they are going to project them onto the scapegoated child. They are going to relieve themselves on the scapegoated child instead. So when the partner isn't home, when nobody is home, the frustrations, go on to the child. And meanwhile, everybody else who's an adult, who's independent, who's in that household, they have the power to leave. I mean, this happened to me as well with a sibling. My sibling was older than me, much older, right? So when I hit my teen years, like 12, 13 years old, he was also gone. And of course he was the golden child. He was like the the perfect, you know, the perfect child who could do no wrong. So even while we were still in that household, if he made a mess in the kitchen or something like that, I would be the one who got the beating for it. And even if he would own up to it with my mother that he was the one who made a mess in the kitchen, I could hear the conversation, and she would say, you don't have to lie to protect your sister, you know. And so it's very different the way that children are treated, as all scapegoats know who come out of these systems. And you know, in my case, when my sibling was old enough, he left the house. He got a job. You know, he was pushed towards success. He got himself a nice family, a nice girlfriend with a healthy family, and so on. And you know, would visit home only, you know, occasionally, right, for dinners and things like that. And when I would go and talk to him and beg for help and things like that, again, the denial, he would actually laugh and joke about her behavior, and it was so funny to him when the things that she'd do to me, it was so funny when I said it like that. It's so funny when you say it like that. It's so funny. Like, that's what he would do, you know, when I would go and beg for help. So the avoidance of the real issues in these families is absolutely huge. And then aside from that, you also have the image factor. You know, if you got to think about career, religion. You know, I'm not going to name names too much, but there's so many cases on that you've seen in the news, you know, of a parent that had like the perfect image, like YouTube videos, or they had like the, you know, they attracted all this attention, you know, because they were doing such wonderful things with their children and such, and then they end up going to jail because what happens behind closed doors is what happens with behind closed doors is actually abuse. But when the image that they show, the pictures that you see, the things that they display to the world is completely different from what happens behind closed doors. And so that image aspect, you know, is not only protected by the abuser, but also enabling family members who don't want the family image to be shattered. And like I said, it could be religious reasons, you know, for example, like families stay together, right? And even if there's abuse, you know, we have to, this is the dynamic that you're born into, and that's the way it is, and then that's it. You know, you have to just sort of adapt and deal with it. That's what scapegoated children are told, even though the things that they have to adapt to are traumatic and abusive and you know, cause trauma. And then of course you also have the mental health stigma. Again, this was something that I had in my family. You know, the mental health, you know, mental health is a myth. Nothing that exercise and good food can't fix by itself, right? Nobody's actually, you know, it was, you know, in my case, it was absolutely clear that my mother's narcissism was actually a symptom of something much bigger. And because there was a lot of things that she was doing that were just not, like, it wasn't, there was so many symptoms that something was seriously wrong. I wasn't allowed to bring outside help because of that mental health stigma, you know. And so somebody who may be suffering very deeply from a disorder or mental health, severe mental health issues, you know, they will not be encouraged to go seek help, and the enablers will not bring them to get help. They will also, you know, protect their own image, and they will protect that person by enabling them and by sweeping the problems under the rug so that they can avoid bringing that person to get the help they need. This is something that I've experienced enablers to do, you know, in the system that I was in. And so what happens in these types of systems is that denial and dysfunction rules. And when the scapegoat says, no more, you know, I'm not doing this anymore, well, that mentality, that dysfunctional, it doesn't go away. It continues. The blaming continues. The shaming continues. And except that now you got a scapegoat who says, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm leaving. So now they're shattering all the rules. They're shattering the family image. You know, they're shattering the enablers' ability to stay in their bubble of, you know, denial, of avoidance. You know, they shatter the comfort of denial. for enablers. And this disturbs everybody's comfort zone. This disturbs everybody's me world when the scapegoat decides no more and they go no contact. And as a result of disrupting everybody else's me world, well, the scapegoat is called selfish and mean-spirited. So what does mean-spirited really mean? You know, if we examine, why don't we examine for a second what it means to be mean-spirited, okay? Being mean-spirited describes someone who enjoys inflicting pain and suffering onto others. And it's somebody who's vindictive and petty, and they will deliberately cause harm. You know, they will punish. They will punish with intention of making the other person suffer, because that's the punishment. You're going to suffer. The punishment is that you get to suffer now, right? And they behave like this out of jealousy. They behave like this because they have a need to control and to have power over another person. They lack empathy, and also because they have a lot of deep, unresolved, deep-seated issues that they will deflect onto others. And there is a complete lack of self-awareness. A complete lack of self-awareness, right? And this description actually doesn't describe the scapegoat. It describes the person that the scapegoat is running away from and protecting themselves from. There's a huge difference between cutting contact with someone to protect yourself and protect your mental health, and cutting contact by giving the silent treatment to inflict pain as a punishment. Okay, like you decide to give the person the silent treatment as a punishment. The second option, this is what the abusive parent does. And it has nothing to do with what the scapegoat is doing. And it has everything to do with what the scapegoat is running away from. But the narcissistic family system will project the narcissist's behavior onto the scapegoat. They will see us distance ourselves from the narcissistic parent or caretaker, whoever it is, and because the silent treatment and temper tantrums and dysregulated behavior has been so normalized in that family, it has become ingrained and part of that culture, that they will truly believe that the scapegoat, this is what they're doing, that they are throwing a tantrum, that they are doing silent treatments, that they will truly believe in their mentality that the act of protecting yourself is actually just a tantrum or just a silent treatment that mimics what the narcissistic parent is doing. They will think that going no contact is vindictive silent treatment because that's how the narcissist behaves in that household. And therefore they will think, this again. Now we got, two dysregulated people that are doing this. But that's not the case at all. At all. They will think that a scapegoat's panic attacks are like tantrums for attention. They will think that a scapegoat's pleas for help are, whining. They will think that a scapegoat's trauma is nothing that of concern. Nothing. It's nothing that really matters, because they are so used to having somebody in that household that operates this in a dysregulated manner all the time, and they simply run circles around that person, and will tiptoe and will fawn and will bring that person chocolate and sweets or whatever it is to make them to fix their moods, and they will tell everybody who's not okay with this dynamic that they are the ones who are causing problems. The narcissistic family system projects issues, everything that is wrong with their culture, with that family culture, onto the scapegoat. The behavior of a narcissistic parent will have become so normalized that the scapegoat safeguards themselves. It will be interpreted as if it's narcissistic behavior, as if it's vindictive. Okay? So now, being mean-spirited and resentful versus being traumatized is not the same thing. Narcissistic family systems, because they operate on denial, they will also deny the scapegoat's trauma. They will deny the scapegoat's need to heal from trauma. They will deny the scapegoat's need to have a sacred space for themselves where they can focus on their own healing. Okay? When people think of trauma, they will often think of major life-altering events, like, of course, rightfully so, like, for example, natural disasters, war, of course, and a serious accident, violent crimes, sexual assault, that kind of thing. And, those things are major causes for somebody to experience trauma. However, those things are not the only things that cause trauma. These things do not show a complete picture of what trauma is. There's big T trauma and there's small t trauma. And big T trauma refers to those significant life-altering events that I talked about just now that make us feel helpless, or that have a person experience horror, like I said, like the ones I mentioned before. But in addition to those big events, repeated ongoing emotional abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse can also cause big T trauma. And, childhood abuse causes big T trauma. And this causes PTSD. And PTSD alters a person's life. It alters a person's behavior. It alters how they see the world, how they interact with the world. You get intrusive thoughts. You re-experience the traumatic event over and over again. So you have triggers. You got flashbacks, you got nightmares, you got intrusive memories, you can't sleep, you got avoidance, you become super highly reactive and hyper vigilant, and we can get anger outbursts and difficulty concentrating and sleep disturbances and so on, and the scapegoat has to deal with the effects of PTSD when they come out of the system, and all of this is completely denied. Is avoided, it's not talked about. And on top of it, and instead what's talked about is that the scapegoat who's suffering from PTSD, they are not allowed to take care of themselves and to focus on healing their wounds. They still have to focus on their abuser and the abuser's dysregulations and the abuser's wounds. Look, I understand that everybody needs to heal, okay? But the scapegoat does not have to return. Healing for a scapegoat is not going back to an abusive relationship that doesn't change. If they decide to heal and get themselves checked in and get therapy and start working on themselves, that's great. And the scapegoat has the right to do those things as well. And the scapegoat needs to have a safe space where they can heal from those things. And it's up to them to decide if they will allow that person into their life or not. It's really their decision. It's part of their own healing journey. It's personal. It's nobody else's prerogative to decide, that the scapegoat has to be in the same room as the person who beat them, who sexually abused them, who psychologically and emotionally dismantled them ever since they were children. This is the scapegoat. The scapegoat gets to decide this, not other people, And so, of course, for this section, I'm talking about the big T trauma, but then there's also the little t trauma. Little t trauma, it refers to events that don't involve major violence or disasters, but they do still create significant distress in the person. And in the context of scapegoating, examples of small t trauma, we got things like bullying. We got things like consistent antagonism that doesn't stop. Being consistently targeted by a passive-aggressive parent every single day. Being consistently criticized. Being consistently ganged up and against and isolated, right, by the narcissistic parent. Being consistently emotionally rejected by the parent, right? Because it's conditional love. It's just, there's no I love you only if you do, if you make me happy, but of course they're never happy. So you can never fulfill that. You can never get that love that keeps being promised to you if you change and change and change and change again. It never happens. Having your experiences, your inner world, be completely demonized, invalidated, denied, minimized over and over again. Being raised in an environment where there's no joy, where there's no emotional safety, where there's no laughter. And there's only laughter when guests come over or when there's pictures being taken. Okay? That's when you'll see laughter. But as soon as the doors are closed, it's a completely different ballgame. You know, being put in a position where as a child, you are made responsible for an adult's emotional dysregulation. Really? As a child, you are responsible for an adult's emotional dysregulation, for an adult's, mood and depression and victimhood narrative. You are responsible for all of those things as a child. You have to be a psychologist, you have to be a nurse, you have to be an emotional cheerleader to a parent that will never, ever, ever be happy no matter what you do. And so you have to deal with the shame and that feeling of being a failure, of not being good enough. And this becomes like it's a narrative that becomes sucked into your soul. And you can't rescue a parent that everybody's telling you that it's your job to rescue. You can't do it because you don't have the power to do it. They have the power to rescue themselves. They have to help themselves. They have to reach out for help. They have to become mindful of their behavior. They have to become self-aware. They have to go, okay, I got a problem. The first step is admitting to yourself that you got a problem. And this is the problem. In those types of systems, they never admit to themselves that they actually have a problem. The problem is the child. The problem is the scapegoat. The problem is the world. The problem is never them. It's impossible. It's impossible to be able to work when you're the child of this type of parent. It's impossible to be able to have a healthy relationship with someone who consistently projects, everything onto you. It's just not possible because they consistently, relieve themselves on their child. They will use their child as an emotional relief system for their trauma. And because this doesn't last, they have to do it every day. They do it every day. And this will go on for 20, 30, 40 years until adulthood, and beyond. This behavior just doesn't change. So while these incidents that I just named, they don't threaten the person per se, like there's no fire, it's not like the house is on fire and you have to run. It's not like a big one major event that everybody can see, they still produce the same trauma responses in adults and children as the big T trauma events do, okay? Repeated exposure to these little T trauma events can cause more emotional harm to a person than exposure to one big T trauma event. The small T trauma, this type of trauma is like the least understood, okay? This is the type of trauma that will happen in intimate relationships, at school, at work, in spiritual places like church or mosque or temple. But it basically happens in relationships, and this is the type of trauma that will cause CPTSD, okay? And CPTSD, just like PTSD, has overlapping symptoms. It's the same thing. You got your flashbacks and your nightmares and your avoidance behavior and so on. But with CPTSD, you've got additional, broader range of symptoms, that extend beyond the symptoms of PTSD. Because that's where you get your self-esteem issues, right? Because it's personal. You got the shame, you got the depression, you got anxiety disorder, you got panic disorder. You don't know how to set boundaries anymore. You don't know how to say no healthily. You got perfectionist issues, you're hypersensitive, or maybe it's the other way around, and you don't feel your feelings anymore because you had to numb yourself to protect yourself. You become impulsive and so on, right? And there's a whole range of behaviors that survivors will take on who suffers from CPTSD, because the abuses were ongoing and ongoing and ongoing and ongoing, for such long extended periods of time that it shaped, your behavior. It shaped how you view the world. It shaped how you see people. It shaped how you interact with the world, how you see yourself and how you see your place in the world. And this happens because the person's nervous system has to adapt to these repeated assaults without ever being given a chance to heal their wounds, because they couldn't. We were children. We're talking about being a child and being raised in this kind of environment. You're never given a chance to heal your wounds. What happens instead is that we adapt. And adapting is not healing, it's just adapting. We adapt the situation, and then we take on, all sorts of behaviors to survive in that dysfunctional household, right? We learn to lie to protect ourselves. We learn to shapeshift. We learn to tiptoe. We start smoking, doing drugs. We numb ourselves, right? We numb ourselves so that we don't connect with our feelings anymore, because being connected to our feelings is too painful. We learn to we make impulsive decisions, right? For example, because we're consistently put in fight or flight response. We keep having to fight, we keep having to run, we keep having to fawn. So the nervous system is constantly being pushed into those states, and this is how you're shaped. This is how this trauma, this shapes you as you grow into adulthood. And we grow up completely fragmented and disconnected from ourselves. And here's another aspect of trauma which is completely misunderstood. Trauma is what happens inside of you. It's the injury that you sustain. So two people can go through the same event, and one person will come out completely traumatized, and the other person will not. And that's just that's the way that trauma works. Just because one person didn't come out traumatized from being in the same household doesn't mean that the other person is not going to be traumatized. And of course, we're talking about narcissistic family systems here. So we're talking about, children being treated very differently by the same parent. So they both will see that the dysregulated parent is dysregulated. But one is going to be the one who gets all the beatings and all the shame and all the attacks and the character destruction. And the other one will be pushed towards success and praised, and they will do no wrong, as they are the representative of everything that's wonderful in the family, right? Well, the scapegoat is the representative of everything that is wrong with the family. So both kids will have the same parent, but they will have two completely different experiences in the household. And, the factor that makes it that a person is traumatized and another one is not, is that the person who is traumatized, they did not have the support they needed to heal. They did not have the tools that they needed to heal while the events were occurring. They had nothing to hold on to. They had nothing. And they weren't given what they needed to heal when the trauma occurred. So trauma will be experienced differently depending on the person, on the situation, on their role within the dynamic, and so on. Every person has their own experience, and we become traumatized by the traumatic events that happen to us, but trauma is really the wound, is the injury that we sustain within, and this is what we need to heal. And so here is what I'm going to tell you now. There's a huge difference between going no contact to protect yourself, to protect your mental health, to create a safety bubble for yourself where you can focus on your healing, your safety, where you can, work on yourself so that you can become a healthy and the best version of yourself, okay? Versus giving the silent treatment out of spite to hurt somebody else, okay? The silent treatment is designed to hurt and to punish. Protecting yourself has nothing to do with that. As we all know, it has nothing to do with that. Protecting yourself is protecting yourself, and that's it. Now, if the narcissistic family system that you come from is unable to grasp the concept that you are protecting yourself, and that you need to prioritize your mental health, and that you have PTSD, you have cptsd, you have to heal, you have to take some time to heal, you need a safety zone, a sacred space surrounded by safe people. If they're not able to grasp this concept, this is not in your control. This is not in your control. And you can't force them. You can't make them. Each and every person has to introspect on their own role in perpetuating these toxic dynamics that occur in these systems. Each and every person has to introspect, for themselves. And you can't do that for them. You just can't. All you can do is prioritize yourself, protect yourself, and be selfish in a healthy way. You have to be selfish. When you come out of these systems, you have to be selfish. You have to be selfish. You have to do what's right for you. And that's it. Because your mental health and your emotional safety, your well-being, this has to become your first priority. And if other people don't agree with that, if other people disown you for that, screw them. Screw them. They're not good for you. They're not safe people for you. They're no good. They're only going to draw you back into a place that will re-trigger you and that will continue making you sick. And after experiencing the trauma, it's normal for your body to have reactions, okay? These reactions are not disorders, okay? There's nothing wrong with you, okay? Your body created survival mechanisms to protect you. And so you adapted. You adapted. Your wounds were never given a chance to heal. You couldn't protect yourself while they all drove off and avoided dealing with your abuser and left you to fend for yourself. You had to find ways to adapt, to survive that kind of environment. You had to learn to people please. You had to disconnect for yourself for some time. You had to learn to shapeshift. You had to fawn. You had to run. You had to do things to protect yourself. And as you reach adulthood, these mechanisms that protected you will become self-sabotaging mechanisms. The process of shedding those behaviors and finding your peace, finding your authenticity, bringing your body to a state that it knows that it's safe now. You're safe now. This is a whole process that as a survivor we all have to undergo through. But you can't hate any part of yourself. That's what I'm trying to say. Don't hate any part of yourself. Because your reactions were your body's way of protecting you. So now the work becomes self-awareness, mindfulness, working on your triggers, and most importantly, creating a safe space for yourself without guilt, without shame. Prioritizing yourself, your emotional safety, and understanding that you don't have to engage with anybody who enables the abuser in your life. You don't have to engage with anybody who downplays your experiences, anybody who tells you all sorts of things just so that you could bring your attention on this regulated family system that refuses to heal and avoid doing the work, or are unable to do the work of healing yourself. So your sacred space, creating your sacred space emotionally, spiritually, and physically has to become your first priority. Because really your life depends on it. Your mental health depends on it. You have to prioritize your healing process. You have to be selfish. Okay? Having said that, don't isolate yourself if you can. Reach out to safe people. Okay? This is a slow process. This is not something that happens overnight. But it does happen. It is possible. There are safe people out there. There are people that are good for you out there. And isolating yourself is what the family taught you to do, But it's so important to learn to break that and reach out for help when you need to reach out for help, and start connecting with people that understand you, that are safe for you, and that have nothing to do with your abuser or with the normalizing of dysfunction. I have said it before and I'll say it again, in my opinion, enablers are 100 times more capable of causing damage to the scapegoat than the actual abuser, the narcissistic parent in that household. Because while they might not be participants in the actual attacks, they watched, they enabled, and they did nothing. They avoided, they ignored, they left. They left you to fend for yourself because they could, even though they knew that you couldn't. Okay? So reaching out to enablers, anybody who has a history of enabling the abuser, is not healthy. And it's so important for you to create a safety zone for yourself outside of that circle, completely beyond that circle. You know, something completely new and something that is safe for you. Remember that your body is your temple, okay? And you got to get yourself to a healthy place, because the body and the mind are connected. So self-care all around, be selfish, love and trust yourself. You have to come first now. You have to come first now, okay? Disengage from anybody who's ever invalidated you and prioritize your safety and your peace. Repeat, I love myself, I trust myself, and don't give up. Don't give up. Keep going.